Hi, nice to connect with you guys. My name is Mark Slingo. I am a diving instructor, an instructor trainer based out in Kenya where I have a dive school. Now, reason I wanted to talk to you guys this afternoon is about adaptive diving. Now, I unfortunately 21 years ago, when I was a new instructor, I was about 7 weeks after my IE, I managed to fall off a balcony in Thailand, break my back, and I was paralyzed from the waist down. I'm very, very lucky. I was working as a diving instructor when it happened, and I had progressive bosses and friends in the diving industry who encouraged me to get back into diving and teaching and see how far I could go. And I eventually, with them, once I was working at how to do skills and how to accomplish performance requirements, managed to actually work my way up the ladder to become an instructor trainer or a course director. And this has been very important. And since then, there's been a lot of movements forward in adaptive diving, which I'm going to answer a few questions this afternoon about how adaptive diving is evolving, how you can get involved, and what adaptive diving can do for someone with a disability who wants to take up the sport. Well, to be honest, when I first actually became a dive pro, I wasn't very good. It wasn't something that I was really aware of at all at the time. It was thrust upon me when I managed to break myself that, I had to sort of adapt myself to find out how I could train. And then I was introduced through agencies such as IAHD, which is the International Association for Handicapped Divers, back with it. And it was relatively new diving for people with disabilities back then. And I was happily, I worked at a progressive dive center who really got behind it and wanted to learn. And so we all sort of went forward together and sort of then began running adaptive programs and trying to encourage people with different challenges, be it, because obviously there's so many things that can be classed as a disability or a challenge. We just tried to get involved with working with as many different people as possible and learning. And we're never going to actually learn everything, but that was really what got me involved. Was I was just sort of pushed into it by myself. And then once I'd done a few courses for people with different challenges and just realized what a brilliant transformation can overcome just by the fact of getting in the water, blowing some bubbles and being free of adaptive devices. Well, adaptive diving, if you sort of just try to describe it, somebody hasn't heard about it. Everyone seems to think that there's sort of a defining line between things. You have disabled activity and able-bodied activity. And the great thing about diving is that isn't the case. It's adapting because the sport can adapt to actually meet the needs of the different diver. And we look at ways to sort of work within training standards to see if people with challenges can actually get through the diver programs and actually earn full certifications. And if not, then the adaptive system, there are sort of multi-level certifications which enables anyone, who actually has a go to get a certification, provided they're medically and mentally able to complete the program. Well, obviously I can really speak for myself and sort of the other sorts of conditions I've worked with and people I've talked to over the years. But why is scuba diving valuable to people with physical disabilities? From my point of view, it's a level of freedom I don't have when I'm on land and restricted by gravity. In the water, I don't have a wheelchair. There aren't steps for me to climb. I can go up, down, side to side, I'm weightless. And that level of freedom, I'm also the same as the other divers doing the same activity. And as I say, as a physical thing, that is a main thing as a head factor. And, you know, it's also exercise. You get obviously a lot of exercise from diving, yes, because there's fewer physical activities that you can do on land, and this is just one where you're actually going, you're swimming, you're enjoying it, and it's just a wonderful freeing experience. I think the biggest misconception people have about adaptive diving is that it's going to be much harder in the water for the adaptive diver in comparison to an able-bodied person. This is really a massive misconception, because the major difficulties in adaptive training are really in the logistical side of things. Getting to pools, getting to boats, getting in and out of the water. When you're actually in the water with training gear, it's a lot easier. And I tend to find that people with so-called disabilities don't tend to find as many mistakes or reasons why they can't do something. There's always a how we're going to do this, not I can't do this. And that's so overruns the misconception that people can't be trained. They can, it's just about finding the way to do it. And in many cases, they can actually earn full scuba certifications all the way up the normal scuba training ladder and don't need the extra, how do we say, disabled certification, the multi-level systems, level 1s, 2 and 3. How do we assess whether somebody's ready to begin training? Well, that's a simple answer, really. It's the same as everybody else. You go, you fill out a medical form. Are you fit to use scuba? Now, there might be more yeses, and the doctor's verification might be required in a lot of cases. But yeah, finding out that someone's fit for scuba is the same way. First the medicals, paperwork, and then the swim test. The swim test, obviously, people have to pass them to get certain levels, and that's no different to any other diver. So that's how we really define it. There isn't any difference. Well, every disability and condition would need to be individually assessed for what adaptations have to be made within the scuba training and equipment side of things. The main adaptation, obviously, for somebody who's mobility impaired like myself but has got full use of their arms, is that I don't use fins. I swim with my hands, and therefore I've just had to adapt how I perform scuba skills and how, say, scuba skills need to be adapted to make sure I still hit the requirement, but sort of can do it within my own means. Instructors, adaptive instructors, have to think about how they're going to demonstrate a skill, because if you've got somebody who's mobility impaired, can't use their legs or hasn't got legs, there is no point demonstrating a correct finning technique using their legs. They need to think of how is the person actually going to do this, and will find a way to meet the requirements set by the training organization. There are also, say, lots of different adaptive equipment available out there: DPVs, webbed gloves, hand fins, and sort of I've seen adapters, say, amputation, and say fins that can be attached to limbs. Everyone is different. The only way you find out is by trial and error and experimentation to find the perfect solution for you. What role does mindset play in it? It's incredibly important, the mindset of somebody, especially when they're coming to you for scuba training. If somebody's actually sought out scuba training and said, I want to be able to do this, even with a disability, odds on that they have a pretty good impression of themselves. You know, they want to be there, they want to learn. Now, when you bring it in the earlier rehabilitation phase, this is where mindset can be a little harder to challenge, but the transformation effect is even bigger, because you're actually taking somebody Well, most of us got into this situation in lots of cases by doing something silly. We used to live our lives at 100 miles an hour. Now our brains probably still live at 100 miles an hour, and we don't like accepting that there's less for us to do. So being given the opportunity is the main thing, and the belief from basically other people around us and the training and the instructor, your family, and getting the right mindset is very important, because then you actually can address the scuba training and actually get to that higher level. And that's really, really cool. The transformation you see on people is amazing. As an instructor, it's probably the best feeling you get when you're teaching. Well, the instructor's attitude is really, really important when you're going to try and train somebody who has a special challenge, because you've got to be open-minded. Patience is the most important thing here, but open to maybe how skills can be done differently, how you're actually going to address the way you conduct the training, and be prepared to fail and try again until you actually get sort of the right, the way that works. And that might take a longer time. So you should be prepared for training to take longer. You should be open to letting your student who has the challenge contribute towards the solution, because remember, they are the expert on their condition. You're not the expert. You can read some generic stuff, you can work with people, but to actually get the whole impression, ask them. Let them be part of the solution. They might have a better way of doing it, or have a better way of trying it. And that applies really also when you're teaching able-bodied, teaching anybody. This is not necessarily geared at disabled divers, but it's key to actually making things, and towards the success of any training program you do, it's a good idea. Oh well, as I said before, clear communication and having the right attitude are paramount to the success of any training in adaptive diving. If you think it's not going to work and go in with a negative mindset, it affects everyone. And that's the same for the student. That is the same for people around. Everyone really needs to have a positive mindset to actually have the belief that this can work. Now, you are the expert on what needs to be done with regards to the scuba training skills and being able to safely dive on scuba. That's where you come in. But they are the expert on their disability. So don't assume that you know everything. You actually need to be open, communicating, so that then you can find the best possible way of doing it. And educating yourself, instructor attitude, and educating themselves in what is available out there to try and help people meet performance requirements and enjoy their diving. For example, I try, as soon as I try a new piece of gear which I like, which seems to work better for me, makes me get easier through the water, I stick it online. So there's a lot out there, and you can contact your training organization as well. But there is lots which people can actually get involved with to be able to make this process an easier one and less challenging. I think there's a few. I've been very privileged enough to work with some divers with different challenges over the years. I think probably the bit where I felt I'd made the biggest difference was, ironically, from not, in my opinion, not really making a difference at all. Like all good stories, it started when I was sitting in a bar and restaurant, and a family next door saw a dive organization logo on my shirt and saw the wheelchair and said, "You dive?" And I was like, yeah, I'm an instructor. And they were like, wow, because our son, he's got, let's say, a form of cerebral palsy, and would he be able to dive? And I just said, well, I've got a medical here. And I gave them the medical, and next time you're back here, when I was working in Thailand, next time you're in Phuket, please bring, get the medical filled out and bring Clancy down, and we can actually try some scuba in the pool. And shook hands. and wondered if they'd ever come back again. 4 days later, they called me and said, so we went back to Australia and got our son and came back here. Wow, no pressure then. So the medical was all fine, so we just decided to get in the pool with this young man. And we blew some bubbles, sat on the bottom of the pool and basically chucked a torpedo back and forth. You know, for a scuba instructor, this wasn't really that big a deal in our opinion, and just said at the end of it, his dad was in the water with us with a GoPro filming it, and you know, we just said at the end, well, you know, next time let's try the ocean. And after that, I actually moved on to a different job, and I was going to teach a course in Australia, and I saw on LinkedIn when I was advertising this course, the dad found this and wrote on, just going, Mark gave us a transformative experience. We now have something we can do as a family. And we always go on dive holidays, even if it's just shallow diving with our son, but we get to do things together. And from our point of view, that was just amazing, because all I did really was sit at the bottom, do my job, and throw a torpedo back and forth underwater whilst blowing bubbles on Scuba. But it had that transformation effect, and I found that amazing. Well, here's the question that everyone is the main one when you're attempting scuba training for people: the balance between maintaining standards and getting people in the water. It's very, very simple. If you want to get somebody with a disability a scuba certification, they have to meet the performance requirements, the objective. You need to be open-minded when you read what the actual requirement is asking for, and then you just need to be open-minded about how you pursue it. Now, this is done in a confined water environment most of the time to start with, so you've got lots of safe area to experiment, see what you can do, and try to be able to get them so that they can meet each individual requirement for a course. Now, there are going to be some people with their challenges, and it just doesn't, they can't do all of them. That is where training systems like SSI's Classified Diver Program, like the DDI multi-level system, and there are other training organizations who have something where you can issue a certification based on what the diver can do, and then the supervision requirements that will be allowed in the water. So, for example, if you're a level 1, you can dive with another adult certified diver. Level 2, you need 2 divers with you, because then you've got equal assistance available to all divers in an emergency situation. And level 3, 3 divers, one of whom must be a pro trained in how to work with divers with disabilities. So, yes, you don't get to break standards. That's a big no-no. You don't get to break standards. No training organization will allow you to do that. But there is always a program which can, enable people to just try, discover the scuba, even if they can't earn a certification or the agency doesn't offer a tiered certification. They can still do the try programs and go and get in the water and experience being on scuba. Well, we've already touched on this. What qualities make a good adaptive dive instructor or adaptive dive buddy? The first thing is the open-mindedness and ability to believe it can be done, uber patience, and tolerance. Say, a lot of people, what I've found is that some instructors around the world are afraid to work with divers with disabilities. This is not because they are bad people. Most of the time it's because they're afraid of doing something wrong. And so they're just, oh, I don't want to do that. What if I hurt them? What if we do this one? You've just then got to be a bit more of a planner. And again, talk to the diver as part of the solution, especially when, because most of this is a logistics exercise. That's where, say, the dangers lie, and that again depends on where in the world you're working. But if it's little things like you just have to be very, very open and communicative, that's what makes a decent instructor or buddy, if you're going to be impatient and, you know, not want to actually sort of even entertain the idea, then this is not something you should be doing. But if you can get these qualities, then you're going to have an awesome time working with divers who have challenges. You will get some of the most awesome experiences that you can actually imagine. Well, this is the other one that, you know, tends to, I say, maybe put dive centers off working with people with disabilities, because they assume that it's going to be very, very expensive to be kitted out to work with people with different challenges. Now, if you're talking about, you know, building requirements and things, yeah, that can be the case. But in most cases, you don't actually have to run the training on site. Digital learning means that you can, you know, do the training anywhere if you've got a tablet or an iPhone or a laptop. Or, you know, if you actually think about what has to be done, it's just the logistical exercise, and again, interacting with the diver for knowing the requirements and accounting for different things like padding on the side of pools, using pools which don't have lots of steps to them, and, you know, just being, it's not a massive amount of expense that you have to do. It's, well, the more adaptable your dive gear is, that does make a difference. But we're not doing horrendously different dive gear. I mean, in my dive bag, the only difference I've really got is that I've got gloves, webbed gloves, instead of foot fins. Actually, I've got less to carry. And yeah, say the more adaptable your dive gear can be, does make a difference. But it's exactly the same dive gear that everybody else is going to be using. Yes, I know that you see, if you go online, you'll see special adaptive equipment. But whilst that can be good for things like wetsuits and exposure suits, for standard diving equipment, it doesn't really differ that much. So dive centers should not be closed to actually working with people with disabilities. They should actually just think, okay, what are we going to do? And, you know, get involved with programs like Classified Diver. In the PADI system, it's adaptive diving. SDI have got Scuba, and there's lots and lots of programs out there, and in even individual, completely detached disabled training organizations such as Dive Heart. You know, obviously you try and work with your agency the most, but there's lots and lots of information available out there, and dive centers don't have to be too negative about it. There are lots of ways they can make it happen, and it's not going to be a massive amount of cost. It's just about having the right mindset to be able to do it. Yeah, that being said, yeah, there are accessibility challenges in the industry, and that completely depends on where you work. Now, a lot of the world, accessibility isn't the biggest deal in the world. I mean, in comparison to the Western countries where you have Disability Discrimination Acts, Accessibility Act. But that's great when you're at home, but if you want to go to places where accessibility isn't a big thing, you have to work out how logistics can be conducted. This is with regard to pools, boats, ramps, bathrooms. Bathrooms is one of the biggest ones that worries people the most. But there are, say, lots of guides now, and people are becoming more and more open to the potential of disabled people, especially with things like the Invictus Games, the Paralympics. It's not seen as being something that's so out there you can't actually find a solution. Yeah, accessibility is always going to be an issue, but there are diving equipment manufacturers who are now looking at whether their product will be able to be used by adaptive divers. And as technology goes on and on, things are going to become easier. But accessibility, that's always going to be an issue. And in a lot of the cases, you've just got to make do and do the best you can in a safe manner. How has adaptive diving evolved over the past, well, sort of decade, maybe even before that? When I first had my accident, I would say adaptive diving was still in its infancy. There were people who were doing it, and say pioneers such as Fraser, and there were people who were actually actively getting out and doing it. But in the same way that it hadn't really started taking off because the training standards hadn't been addressed since, again, the Paralympics, the Invictus Games coming out, and people are aware of the potential of disabled people. The training agencies, and all sorts of, say, again, maybe having people like Fraser, myself, and other disabled divers moving up through the professional ranks, the training agencies have actually been able to address this and look at how training standards can actually suit people with mobility challenges, and adapting the training standards to make sure that whilst the performance requirement can be met, the wording means that it becomes more open to how the performance requirement is met. And that's been brilliant. And again, the launch of all of the various training agencies, different adaptive programs, that didn't exist 15 years ago. And the fact that pretty much every single major training agency has done it is brilliant. I was actually working for Disabled Divers International, running the training there. And as soon as the major training agencies started putting in adaptive diving, I was pretty much like, well, our work is done. We don't need to have a separate disabled training organization, because the big boys have got involved, and now it's become more mainstream. And that's really important, I think, and that's been a great development, is because, being honest, no one wants a disabled diver card to be told, yeah, I'm a specialist disabled diver. I want the normal card. I want the card that says that I'm just a diver, same as everybody else. And the fact that that is possible now within the training systems is amazing. And the fact that you can get, say, the equipment manufacturers now look into specific products which might be able to help out disabled divers, be it full face masks, be it web gloves, DPVs that can help, say that your buoyancy compensator and how they can be adjusted properly with different weight systems. There's a lot more looking at what can we do for the disabled diver to actually mean that they have a normal diving experience. And that has been a major advance, especially in the last decade. It's awesome. Well, how do we manage entries, especially from boat or shore? This comes down to every single boat in the world, every single shoreline, might have to do something different, because no two ones will be exactly the same. You also then need to evaluate the ocean conditions, or say the open water conditions, not necessarily an ocean, on how to safely perform entries and exits. Whether equipment needs to be donned in the water, or has to, for the sake of performance requirements or safety, has to be put on before entering the water, and then the best way of doing it. Now, again, this is trial and error and a safety evaluation, which I hope is done before every dive site, just to make sure that it's suitable for any diver to get in the water, but especially when we're talking about, say, divers with different challenges, be it with regard to swell, currents, water temperature, and how long they're going to be waiting to get in the water, and how easy it is with their body makeup on how easy it is to actually put the equipment on, and say, do they have to be held upright, or can they just be put into the water? So lots and lots of different considerations. No two are going to be the same, but again, having a big wide mindset on how you might accomplish it can be invaluable in this situation. What advice would I give somebody who's got a disability, who's thinking about learning to dive? Try it. Be open to it. Don't assume I can't do this. Don't immediately put up blocks on saying, well, how would I do this? How would I do that? Seek out somebody who is possibly better involved with SSI classified diving, PADI, adaptive, scuba, somebody who actually works in these training scenarios and is familiar with you're having an open mindset to be able to accomplish this. You will be surprised what you can do. So don't automatically assume that this isn't for you, must be too difficult. Scuba can be a great release, so be as open-minded about as possible. Get cleared to dive by somebody who knows your disability. And if they know about diving, even better, because then there's no sort of misconceptions. You will find a lot of cases that, say, general practitioners, GPs, are a little less open to signing off something they don't know about. So finding someone who knows your condition possibly is really, really important for making sure you get the correct medical clearance. But once you've got the medical clearance, also, I'll be honest, when you've learned to dive, be open to getting your own equipment. I can't say this enough, because having your own equipment for any diver is a big thing, but for somebody with challenges, having something which is custom, bespoke, set up for you can make so much difference that it's always a good idea. Now, not immediately when you're learning to dive, because you want to try things, you want to see what works for you. But if you get into diving, really look at getting your own equipment and finding the best thing that works for you, depending on where you are in the world and where you'd like to be, because you want this to become a regular activity for yourself, because it's such a good release. I'll say this is one of the best effects that diving can have on something. Your mental well-being and, you know, sense of inclusivity after the onset of a disability can be, you know, it's not great. I was very lucky in my disabled life, if we call it that. I was raised by scuba divers. I left the spinal unit in the UK after, say, 3 months in the spinal unit, and within 4 weeks I was back in Thailand because my boss said, come out and see if you can still teach. And so I was immediately part of, we're a tribe, divers. We are a tribe. We are a very inclusive bunch. We always want more people to join us. We always want more people diving. And it's an automatic brotherhood, sisterhood that we are, say, essentially, you join as soon as you become a scuba diver. Your interests are the same. And it's such an inclusive thing that the ability to be integrated is, you can't really talk about it too much because it's just amazing. This is actually the first guy I taught after my accident, who he had a formula muscular dystrophy, and we took him in the ocean. We were not too deep. We held onto his tank and swam him around. He enjoyed it amazingly. And after the dive, he was back in the shop and he's like, "Can I get a T-shirt?" And we said, "Yeah, someone get him a T-shirt." And he was like, "No, I want the ones that you guys wear, which says Dive Crew." And the guy who was working with me that day, he noticed this, and so I was like, it was important for him to belong. And so he's like, yeah, and are you coming next door to the pub for diver beers afterwards? And this guy's just, I get to come for the beers? Well, yeah, you're a diver, and that's where we go after the dives. And he was just so happy that he was part of a group and part of something. And then it just goes to the normal diving conversations. Where's the best place you've dived? Where would you go? And just general debate, because we are that sort of a tribe. And that can be really, really important for the inclusivity. And there's also the fact that you're doing something, again, that, you know, perhaps you didn't think you could do. And so that transformation experience is this, you know, you actually elevating yourself anyway, so that can be massively good for your positive well-being. So there's so many angles that this can actually take on. It's difficult to describe this in one sort of sentence. what are the benefits of adaptive diving beyond the underwater experience? I think in terms of the way you see yourself, the way others see you. I mean, automatically people see a mobility device and go, oh, that can't be good. And then if they find out that, oh, actually you're a certified scuba diver and you like to go diving every weekend, then their perception of you and potential people and what people can actually do despite challenges actually changes. So you can actually get the chance to change a lot of mindsets. And that's an amazing position to be in. And so the adaptive scuba, the fact that it's found a way to include more people, actually can do so much more than just get people in the water and weightless underwater. It can change the way people are perceived by their own friends, family, and other people who interact with them. It's incredible. How do dive teams and dive buddies sort of react after diving with you or with somebody with a challenge for the first time? Normally, there's a certain element of, wow, that was awesome, and a certain element of surprise. I didn't think it would be that trouble-free. They were expecting it to be a lot harder than it was, and they love the reaction that they get from the diver with the challenge, and they love the fact that they were part of that journey. And being a part of it, something which is so transforming, they love that. And that's what I've found generally with anyone who works with people with disabilities for the first time. It also means that in a lot of cases they've overcome any mental barriers that they had to this being able to be a success. And again, opened up the possibilities to what people see as the potential for people with disabilities. And then it's in the diving side of things, it's, well, how far can they go? But yeah, it's on the overwhelmingly very positive experience, always reported by people who are working in these situations. Is proper training important when working with divers with disabilities? It definitely helps. And obviously, if you are teaching scuba in any way, shape or form, or teaching adaptive buddies, you need to have the relevant qualifications. And if you have sought out training on, sort of generic training on working with divers with disabilities and certain things that you might have to look out for, that can only be beneficial. If you go in just, I've done my IDC, this is how we sort of do the training, I've done my ITC, I'm not changing on this, this is the best way to do it, you're going to find it very, very hard. So seeking out further training for working with people with disabilities and the ways of getting them through programs can be really, really valuable to the success of any training that you are actually going to undertake. And in a lot of cases, especially if you want to issue these tiered certifications, you will need the appropriate instructor qualification to do it. Well, we've already touched upon how adaptive diving can change perceptions about disability. I think, well, as an example, I was contacted by some friends who said, who called me and they said, well, on their dive boat the next day, we've got a guy with a wheelchair. And I'm like, great. And they're like, well, what do we do with him? I'm like, well, take him diving would be my suggestion. And they're like, yeah, but is there anything special we have to do with him? I was like, guys, how many times have you been diving with me? And they're like, oh, no, yeah, but you're not really disabled when it comes to diving. We don't even see you as that because, you drive a car, you go diving every day, you teach diving. I thought that was a great compliment, I wasn't even seen as being disabled. It's only when we've got to get you up steps that you become a problem. And it's not, that was joking, but it did really push through on how people's perceptions because they just assume because you can do this that you actually have got more ability than a lot of people would think you have. So yeah, adaptive diving is a really, really good tool for this in changing people's perceptions and actually opening up to what you might be able to accomplish. Well, the most rewarding times I've had as an instructor, there's definitely been some, especially working with adaptive divers. I mean, every time I'm teaching normal instructor courses or open water courses, you get an amazing feeling. But yeah, working with divers who people wouldn't consider could ever do it. I once worked with a chap from Canada, and we did this in the Florida Keys. He had no arms and no legs. Unfortunately, he was a quadruple amputee, having had septicemia when he was a little boy. And working with someone with this mindset, he could not be defeated, and he just wanted to experience, and it brought out all the challenges in what we were doing. I had to think, okay, he can't equalize. How are we going to do this? Okay, full face mask would be better for communication. And again, maybe what did we do? We did a free diving clip, swimmer's clip on his nose. So all he had to do was blow against it. And coming out of that and just thinking, we've done that. We made it happen. And he enjoyed it enormously. And again, these experiences were sort of some of the most rewarding I've had in 21 years as a dive pro. And it's normally teaching what we would consider to be the most basic stuff. But it's just the ability to change people's perceptions as well, I think, is always important. From having me announce, oh, I'm your instructor, and so you see the initial whoa surprise on people's faces, and then they're going, oh, well, he must be able to do it. Let's see how he does it. And just their general acceptance of, yep, okay, let's do it. And that's been really, rewarding, and also, opens up hopefully the potential for more people in my situation to actually go through, become diving instructors, and be able to pass on their love of diving, and which is the big goal. I think certainly with my work with, say, the training organizations that I have been involved in their adaptive programs, my goal actually was to do this at a pro level. It's nice to be able to go out and tell people with disabilities, yeah, you can dive and you can go and find this place, this place, this place, this place around the world. But I figured it's a much better idea to go out and attack it at the pro level. Get disabled diving not to be a niche activity for a dive center, but mainstream, part of the main drag, if you will. So get as many instructors, dive pros, dive masters, dive centers, dive boats, able to work with people with disabilities and aware of the different challenges that might face them, but able to hit this head on and, be actively encouraging and offering training. Again, it's not that people are bad people per se, it's that they are not aware of just how easy and rewarding it can be to work with divers with different challenges. And that has been some of the most rewarding stuff of my career. It's taken me all over the world. I didn't know that this would ever come to me, but so it's just making the best of it and seeing if we can actually do that to improve other people's lives. Well, moving on from my last point, how can the wider scuba industry support adaptive diving? Very simple. Accept it. Integrate it. I would be honest, I think, personally, that these separate disabled training programs shouldn't really need to exist in the pro levels. This should be part of the dive master and instructor training process, so that disabled divers aren't seen as being on the niche. They're seen as being part of the mainstream. And yes, it's going to require accessibility issues. I mean, certainly in things like liverboards, where it's very difficult for mobility devices to be taken on board, and liverboard companies tend to shy away from this, thus reducing the amount of accessible areas for people to dive. And so yes, growing more accessible dive boats, dive destinations, but a general worldwide sort of acceptance that this is mainstream, not a niche. That's where the scuba industry needs to really begin to expand on. Obviously, there are some areas which people with physical challenges can't do. But that's the same for everybody. Everyone has physical limitations. It's about knowing what is suitable for you per se as a diver, disability or no disability. And that's what the scuba industry is adapting to. What would I say to dive professionals who are hesitant about working with disabled divers? Give it a shot. You don't know how rewarding it can be, and also how much it can extend your own abilities as an instructor, because when you are learning to think outside the box, this isn't something that can be just done and applied to, you know, people with disabilities. This can be applied to every teaching scenario you have to be able to enable someone to accomplish a goal more easily, because it opens up and it's like, okay, how are we going to do this? What's the best way of accomplishing this skill, this scenario, this dive? And so be open to it. Don't automatically go in with a negative mindset saying, I just don't want to be weirded out by different disabilities, problems with bodily functions. Be open. Have a go. Give it a shot. You do not know how rewarding it can be. If you're hesitant, just give it a try. Or research more. Talk to people. I'm always happy to answer from anybody else in the world who wants to know a little bit more about this. I'd be delighted, because I've seen firsthand and on myself how rewarding it can be. So give it a shot. How important are patience and flexibility? Well, probably the most important. It depends on the expectations of both the diver, the instructor. Patience, yes, it might take longer to accomplish something. So having patience is really important, and setting aside extra time. Flexibility, yeah, you might need to change it from how you normally do it, but as long as you're staying within training standards, great. And just be open, and you will be very surprised at the results that you can get. What's going to be the future for adaptive diving? Again, if we all work at it, hopefully it becomes a mainstream thing, not something on the side of the training organizations, not something which only certain instructors have learnt about as a special instructor qualification, but a mainstream thing, something that is taught in the core professional courses and encouraged actively by the agencies and the dive centers and the instructors, who would just say anybody can have a go at this provided they're medically fit, and encouraging people to give it a shot, both at the pro level and at the diver level, and seeing the rewards for people that they can actually get from it. The world is constantly changing. Technology, no doubt, will become more assistive in this with regard to dive computers, communication. I am sure it will make things easier for divers with disabilities, and hopefully we can make this more mainstream. That's my vision, and I really hope that the world goes forward in that way. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to some of my thoughts, rants and raves about what I think about adaptive diving. But the key thing for me is that adaptive diving has been my life, forced upon me maybe, but it's enabled me to live what I would consider to be a pretty positive life, and I would be so happy to hear that it's doing this for other people, and also to giving instructors an opportunity to actually work with people who they might not have considered with in the past, but to actually get out there and do what we do best and be in the life-changing experience. Scuba really does have that potential to do that for people. It gets rid of mobility devices, it takes you to some of the coolest places in the world, and it sort of, you know, it enables you to be more than you thought you could, and that is just amazing. So So thanks really much for listening. And if you ever get the time, please come down and dive with me down here in Kenya. This is where we are, in Diani. Great diving with some of the best turtle diving in the world. We get whale sharks at other times of the year, but it's a really cool place to be. And if you can even go and see some lions and elephants out on safari as well. Thanks very much for listening, and keep diving.